In the last 2 weeks of May 1940, Hitler's blitzkrieg storms through northern Europe, driving the British Army back to the sea. Nazi Germany seems unstoppable.
The invasion of Britain, which I thought was imminent, was going to be the biggest story since the birth of Christ.
You're thinking, this is it. This is going to be it. We'll fight them on the beaches, in the hills. We will never surrender.
It was ruthless stuff. But then, after all, we were fighting for our lives, weren't we?
Dunkirk. Along a 12-mile stretch of beach, 350,000 British troops are stranded, waiting for the Royal Navy to rescue them. The evacuation starts badly. With the harbour destroyed, most troops must be lifted directly out of the water.
The men were standing in a long line right out to the water, and the leading ones were up to here, been standing there for hours, waiting for one boat to come in, and the minute it got there, they all hung on to the side and tipped the bloody boat over, see? So you had all this problem of emptying the boat of water and trying to get them in again.
By the end of the second day, less than 1/10 of the men have been evacuated. The German army is closing in fast, threatening to capture all who remain. From the skies, bombers attack continually.
You could hear the bombs dropping, the shells from the big warships booming out to sea, and there was just one huge pool of smoke, black, horrible smoke, all this smoke in the sky. Dimmed the sun at times.
Wounded in battle a week earlier, 20-year-old soldier Ernie Leggett is waiting in the sand dunes for a hospital ship.
I couldn't walk, and I was at the mercy of whatever happened. I just couldn't get away. When danger got close, when the bombs were dropping, then my comrades would cover me up with their own bodies to shield me from being wounded further. That is what you call comradeship.
Over 200 British and French ships are now involved in the rescue mission. "19-year-old Ian Nethercott is aboard a destroyer sailing through a deep water channel menaced by German torpedo boats.
The wakeful had been coming out, full of troops. She was blown completely in half, and they lost about 800 soldiers in the water, and a lot of them are still floating about, you know, floating in towards the beaches in their overcoats and God knows what. On some parts of the beaches they'd had to stop rowing and pump because there were so many bodies floating in the shallows that you couldn't get your oar in and pull them into the beach, so you just had to punt the boat through all these corpses to get into the beach.
A little cutter pulled alongside, a person with a megaphone shouting, "You'll all have to go back on the beaches. 9 out of 12 ships have been sunk." And you know, you reel back, ships sunk? 9 out of 12. He says, "We'll try our best to get you up tomorrow." So back we went.
28-year-old Sergeant Major Martin McLean has been in the thick of the fighting during the retreat to Dunkirk. He's been waiting his turn to be rescued for 3 days.
We were shocked to think that we were going to be left prisoners of war. I was. and the Germans were shelling, and a shell had hit the granite pier. And we come across this pile of French soldiers, and they were all mown down. Blokes on the bottom with legs off, dead, others piled up moaning. A bloke stuck in the middle with his jugular vein cut here, and he's pleading for help, and the blood squirting from him. We were so shocked we shot off there onto the sand and left them, but we'll come back to do what we could for them. But it was hopeless. They'd killed all these men. What a wasted life.
While most of their comrades still wait for rescue, the first shiploads of troops arrive home, to a nation in shock at the scale of the military disaster that is taking place in France.
I cycled down to see the troops arrive at the pier. They was in a terrible state. Many was laying along the seafront, thoroughly exhausted. We could see the full horror of what was happening in the channel.
The worst part about it was seeing other people come home. And you would think, well, he's not back yet. He's not here. Is he going to be all right? He was never out of my thoughts, really. My friend's husband had come home 2 days before, and those 48 hours, I really began to think he wasn't going to come back.
In Downing Street, the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, also waits anxiously for news. As the fate of his army hangs in the balance, he is under intense pressure from his Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, to pursue a peace deal with Germany. In Halifax's absence, Churchill summons his other ministers to his room in the Commons. He implores them to reject any deal with Hitler and to fight on, whatever the cost.
If this Long Island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground.
For the moment, Churchill's words unite a fragile cabinet. But if he cannot get his army safely home, his premiership will be threatened once again. Five days into the evacuation, the rescue fleet faces the largest German air attack so far.
We were about a mile off the pier heads at Dunkirk, and when you looked to the north, you could see this great cloud of German aircraft, and it was amazing. There was layer upon layer of them, fighters riding above them. They all peeled off, and we had 70 on us, and the skipper worked up to full speed, and he was slinging the ship from side to side. And I just suddenly saw this Stuka peering over the bridge, practically it seemed to be almost touching it, and this great big bloody yellow bomb in its clamps. It was 1,000 pounder. It blew a part of the port side in. The next bomb blew up down in the engine room. It killed everyone down there. There was no one alive down there. And the coxswain standing up on the signal deck screaming out, "Abandon ship." And we took to the water. Already in the water you'd got survivors from 5 or 6 ships. They were all floundering around in the oil, screaming and yelling. And the water was bloody cold. And I'd got this cork life jacket on, which kept me up any rate. And we hung on to this Carley raft and paddled away. And we'd only got a few yards, and a couple of these German Messerschmitts came down, and they just opened up and pointed straight at us and just blazed away right across the top of the raft and killed the 2 blokes in it. And I tried to dive under the water to get away and couldn't. I've got my head under, but my bloody feet were sticking up. And I got a bullet right through the bloody knee. Anyway, I floated away and I passed out in the water, and when I came to, I was on my own then. And then I thought, well, I don't know, I'm probably going to die. And I had a long talk with my God. And I was trying to think what it was we used to be taught. Strength now, my fainting soul, and play the man. And through such waning span of life as still to be trod, prepare to meet my God. He used to say that.
On this same day, 30 other ships have sunk. Even so, the operation continues, and the Navy, aided now by a flotilla of small civilian craft, carries 64,000 men away to safety.
We went, queued up for to get on the boats the next day, and a destroyer pulled in, and the skipper or someone on the bridge shouting, "On as quick as you can, jump lads, jump!" We jumped in, and the sailors were grabbing us and pulling us in. And I pulled out, and then the bomber came along, and he dropped his bombs, and it straddled the back of the boat, and the back of the ship lifted up. And the water came over, but we got away all right.
After 4 days waiting without food or shelter, Martin McLean is finally crossing the English Channel.
Landed in a port, and I shouted up to the man, "What place is this, mate?" He says, "It's Dover, mate, this is Dover." I couldn't believe it.
The next thing I remember was waking up, and I'm certain it was at New Haven, and along came a Salvation Army nurse with a trolley, and she gave me a lovely hot mug of tea and a cigarette.
they laid me on the jetty at Dover, and I was sent to some crummy hospital at the back there in Kent. It was me thinking I was going to have a lovely time in a civilian hospital with pretty nurses, and I landed up in Gillingham with these monkey-faced sods in the Navy, you know, the sick bay tiffies, you know, the cruellest men out.
Trains from all over southern England are commandeered to take the troops away from the Channel ports. Martin McLean, 300 miles away from home, is desperate to let his wife know he is safe.
We got on the train, and I had a luggage label in my pocket, ordinary tie-on label, and I wrote on there the wife's address, and I wrote in the back, "Arrive safe and Blighty, be seeing you soon I hope." And I slung it out without a stamp on. She got that from a postman coming down the street, and we still got her, by the way, and he's waving at it and says, "He's all right, all right," because when the mail was coming away, he was all out looking for it, you know.
I was at the hairdresser's when I got home. His sister was round saying, "Fred's home." Oh, I couldn't describe the joy I felt. And when I went down to his mother's, we just hugged each other. And he hadn't had a shave. He wasn't washed. He was hungry. He'd had nothing to eat hardly but a lorry load of salmon they'd found on the way that had been abandoned. Never faced salmon afterwards.
The evacuation has gone better than anyone dared to hope. Almost all the stranded British soldiers are home, along with over 100,000 French troops, Relief at the return of so many men masked the scale of the most crushing humiliation in the history of the British Army.
It was a massive defeat. It was a retreat, but it was turned into the most marvellous, heart-stirring miracle, really.
This is the most magnificent sight of a generation. This is the army, under its magnificent leaders. They have come back from a terrible and bitter battle, but still in their tired and half-closed eyes is mirrored the spirit and cause for which they fight. That has not gone. That can never be taken away from them.
Churchill seizes the moment, speaking to the nation in defiant tones.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
We taught him Syria. He was a bulldog of a man. He had some funny ways, but when he said we'll fight them on the beaches, great. We'll fight them on here and there, everywhere. That done the troops and the world and the country wonders.
Despite the odds against us, he made us believe that we could actually win, that we were unconquerable. And he was asked in the dire moment after the collapse of France and Dunkirk, when we really stood alone, and in that moment of enormous peril, he was asked if our paintings from the National Gallery should be sent to Canada for safety. And he said, no, they should be hidden in caves and cellars. We are going to beat them.
Lord Halifax is not so sure. He makes contingency plans in case Churchill's bravado, as he calls it, should fail. Behind the Prime Minister's back, the Foreign Office sends a message to Germany via a Swedish diplomat, keeping open the option of peace talks. Churchill learns of the exchange and is furious. He orders his ministers to have no such conversations with foreign diplomats and to spread confidence in Britain's ultimate victory at all times. Not every British soldier is home. Peter Vaux is on the run in German-occupied France. With his two comrades, he's hiding here in an abandoned monastery.
We realized that we were quite close to the River Somme, and if we could only get there and get across, there would be French troops the other side. So we decided to walk to the Somme. And we got into marshes, and we got into bogs, and it was ghastly. And we were hungry and exhausted and cold, and from time to time we saw Germans and heard German voices, and we sloshed about in these marshes, and we couldn't get anywhere near the river, which is what we wanted to do. And it was at that point that the Major said, "I don't know, we may have to give ourselves up." And I said, "Not yet." And the corporal said, "Not me, sir."
The men return to the monastery. Local French villagers are afraid to help them, but a refugee from Belgium, Monsieur Gilly, offers to show Peter Vaux the best place to cross the river. Vaux, in borrowed clothes, poses as a refugee himself.
We passed 2 or 3 little positions of Germans until we got right down almost to the river bank. You could see the river bank. And there was a German position there with a sergeant major, and they had a machine gun. And he said, "Well, let's have a look at your identity card." So Gilly produced his identity card. Perfectly in order, of course. And then he turned to me and said, "And yours?" And this Belgian was superb. He turned on him like a tiger. He said, as he told me afterwards, he said, "You are a revolting race. Here is this boy, only speaks Flemish, parents killed by your horrible aeroplanes, walked all the way from Belgium, and you asked him for an identity card? The German was quite shattered. He said, go on, get away, the Baron. So we went away. But when I was asked for my identity card, my heart stood still.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
Churchill's words are broadcast in the United States, whose help Britain desperately needs. But the speech receives a cool reception. At the New York home of the Reed family, owners of the influential Herald Tribune, Whitelaw Reed listens to the speech in the company of former President Herbert Hoover.
In America, people were very pessimistic about England's chances of holding Hitler off. Herbert Hoover was sort of glum about it, thinking that it was too late, and it was too late for America to do anything. And I just got a very negative feeling about his reaction to it all.
Hoover's successor in the White House, Franklin D. Roosevelt, would like to help Britain, but in an election year he must be cautious. Most Americans are strongly opposed to becoming involved in another European war. Under the banner of America First, tens of thousands attend rallies demanding their country's absolute neutrality.
I think they believed in a fortress America, that we could be strong and stay on our own. And I thought that America should come of age, and that we had to become involved and take responsibility for what was going on.
Another reason why America is not rushing to Britain's aid is that many in Washington are concerned about Winston Churchill's character, not least his reputation as a heavy drinker. Roosevelt tells his cabinet,
I suppose that Churchill is the best man England has, even if he is drunk half of the time. He's very unreliable when under the influence of drink.
Churchill's enemies in London share this anxiety. They believe that the Prime Minister's war policy is driven by bravado and Dutch courage. Downing Street Secretary Marion Holmes sees Churchill every day.
Oh yes, he was a regular drinker. He drank quite a bit of brandy but after a huge meal. He drank with food. That was the point. I remember him being served lunch at Chequers. He was very tired and he was working from bed and decided to have lunch in bed. Sardines, which he loved. And there were two carafes on the tray. One had whiskey in it and one had water. And I watched him pour his whiskey onto his sardines, and the water was still in the other carafe. And so I felt this, I've got to intervene here and mention it. He said, well, I must be going dotty, you know. But he never drank to the point of being the worse for wear. And I remember him once saying, I've taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me. And that really summed it up.
Peter Vaux and his two comrades wait for night to fall before making their escape across the River Somme. One of them leaves a memento of his time hiding in the monastery.
That was Corporal Burrows. He came from Wiltshire, and he'd been my driver for a long time. You know, with the tank, your driver and you are very, very close indeed. The rank doesn't enter into it, really. That night we did indeed go down to the river bank. The sergeant major wasn't there, but there were patrols up and down. And we waited and watched them, and we realized there was actually a gap of 10 minutes between the time people went up and down. So we stripped off all our clothes and did them up in a bundle, which the major swam across with. The corporal wasn't a very good swimmer, and I said, I'll help you across. And we set off. But we'd all forgotten one thing, and that was we hadn't eaten now for nearly a week, and we were absolutely exhausted, and I suppose the modern expression would be we were also stressed out. There was no doubt about it, and that everything went wrong. The Major did get across. The corporal began to sink, and I grabbed him by the arms and tried to pull him. And a human body in water is slippery, and his arms slipped from my hands. I didn't grip tight enough. I just hadn't the strength to do it. And I actually dived in and down and tried to get him back, but I couldn't. And he was gone. I failed. And then I don't remember getting out of that river, but somehow I found myself on the far bank. I longed to have saved him. The things haunted me for the rest of my life.
Peter Vaux is held by French soldiers and finally makes it home to Britain. Soon afterwards, Paris falls, and the French government opens peace talks with Adolf Hitler. Residents of England's southern coast expect the worst.
We knew after the defeat of our army, the invasion from Germany was coming. We'd wake up in the mornings and quite expect to see German troops stalking the town. The population of Dover was 40,000, it dropped to 18,000 at that time. The town was deserted. But Dover was then becoming a fortress. Anti-aircraft batteries, the seafront was barbed wired. They was erecting these concrete pillboxes overnight.
All the hotels at the front at Westcliff had been taken over by the Navy, and the barbed wire was going up all along there. But at that time, you saw a lot of the Navy about it. Well, you know, there's somebody here. We're not going to be left unguarded, as it were, if something happens.
For 150 years, Britain's Navy has dominated the oceans of the world. But Dunkirk has shown that her warships are vulnerable to air power. On the 16th of June, German bombers sink the troop ship Lancastria, killing 4,000 men. For the Royal Navy, this is the greatest single disaster of the war so far. The Prime Minister is shattered by the news.
I had seen him suffused in grief at the loss, and he cried. And it takes a very great man, I think, to show his emotions. He was very endearing in a way.
Churchill cables President Roosevelt, pleading with him to send Britain 50 old American destroyers.
Mr. President, I must tell you that in the long history of the world, this is a thing to do now.
But Roosevelt refuses, telling Churchill that Congress and public opinion will not allow such direct intervention in a foreign war. Convinced Britain will fall at any moment, Whitelaw Reid hurries to England to cover the story for his newspaper.
I concluded that the invasion of Britain, which I thought was imminent, was going to be the biggest story since the birth of Christ, and I wanted to be in on it and help him. And I didn't get there for quite a while, so I was very relieved on arriving to find that England was still in one piece.
Britain is not only in one piece. Its people seem to be inspired by their Prime Minister's spirit.
The customs official seemed totally confident that all would be well, and he said he had taken his daughter in hand and he had shown her how to fit a broom handle into the end of a bottle. And then he broke off the big end of the bottle and he said, if any bloody Nazi comes in my house, he's going to get that right in the face.
The customs officer isn't alone. Peter Vaux, now back in England, finds his own family equally defiant.
My father said to me, "Can you get me a pistol?" And I did. And he was an elderly man, of course, but they lived in Paynton. They were very close to the beach. He had a sort of feeling that if a German arrived on the beach, he could get one. And Churchill, remember, did say, one of his speeches, "You can always take one with you." And that would be exactly my father's attitude. He wanted that pistol, and I got him one.
Peter Vaux' regiment is ordered to the south coast to resist invasion. His first job is to find places where tanks and their crews can be based. Most people are keen to help, but not all.
In many cases, it was the people who got quite a lot to lose. Some of them would say, "What's the good? Look what they've done in France. You won't hold them up. They'll be in here in no time. I don't want my house spoiled." But the thing that I always remember it was the little people, the farm labourers, the little farmer, and the people in the terraced houses, who were so marvellous. They had so little to give, and they gave it so readily.
Here are some factory workers who have organised their own defence corps and drill in their lunch hour.
Britain's volunteer army has plenty of fighting spirit, but few modern weapons.
I found that men were sitting up nights making fishing poles, and instead of a hook, they put a wad of gunpowder on it. And the idea was they would be hiding in holes every 100 yards or so. And when a tank came rumbling by, caught in the trap, they would cast the gunpowder on the top of the tank and explode it. And that is how primitive some of the defenses in England were at that time.
France agrees to humiliating peace terms. Churchill now fears that Hitler will add the powerful French navy to his own and seize total control of the English Channel, thus clearing the way for the invasion of Britain. Churchill orders his admirals to seize all French ships in British ports, and he sends a powerful force to demand the surrender of the French fleet in the North African port of Oran. Aboard HMS Resolution is 18-year-old sailor Sam Patience.
We didn't know until the actual sailing that we were going out to engage the French fleet who were trying to get to Brest or whatever, to German-occupied France. And we were told the purpose was to go out and stop them from getting it.
The British negotiate with the French for 9 hours. The result is deadlock. Churchill's admirals are reluctant to open fire on men who were their allies only a few days ago. But the Prime Minister insists, ordering the Navy to settle the matter quickly.
We just opened fire on them. Noise shattering. The ship seemed to shake, you know. You get a full salvo of 8 15-inch guns firing. That's a lot. And 6-inch batteries as well, all out one side.
The French warships, tied up at the quayside and unable to maneuver, don't stand a chance. Within minutes, over 1,300 French sailors are dead.
Oh, there was a lot of damage done. The quayside was piled with bodies, which we did with our shelling. You were never given, a sort of question as to whether it was right or wrong. As far as you was concerned, you was just doing your job. The fleet had to be stopped from going over to the Germans. I didn't feel ashamed about doing it at all. It was a question of them or us.
Within days, Churchill has put the better part of the French Navy out of Hitler's reach. Some call it treacherous. But at a critical moment, it swings the balance of naval power back Britain's way.
When we heard this business of Oran, we felt it was an awful thing, because we'd, after all, I remember thinking at the time we'd seen the French sailors with the red pom-poms on their white hats at Cherbourg when we first landed. It seemed an awful thing to be sinking their ships. But we did understand it, at least we did in the regiment. We understood that it was necessary.
Churchill tells Parliament that his action at Oran proves once and for all that his government will never make peace with Hitler. For the first time since becoming Prime Minister, he is acclaimed from all sides of the House. Now that a quick peace deal with Britain is ruled out, Hitler launches a new offensive. In mid-July, he orders the Luftwaffe to take control of the English Channel and close it to all British shipping.
Every day, every hour, British convoys sail the seas, braving the perils of Nazi air raiders, and here comes a formation bent on challenging our supremacy on the sea. And it's a miss.
I used to stand on the top of the Western Heights and watch the bombing of the convoys, and I waved my fist up in the air. The German bastards was the word I used. My old mum said, "What did I hear you say, Frank?" She said, "I've never heard you swear before." She said, "Don't you ever say that again." I said, "Well, that's what everybody's calling them, Mum."
British fighter squadrons take to the air to protect the Channel convoys. The pilots are guided into battle by RAF ground controllers, assisted by young technicians from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, like 21-year-old Edith Heap.
They had furious battles over the convoys. We used to hear them on the RT, and it was like a running commentary. He said, "Look out, there's somebody on your tail." We could hear all that. And they say, "Oh, so-and-so's been shot down. You know, there's a plane going down, there's a parachute, or there isn't one." So you knew exactly what was happening. And the girls in the radio cabins could actually say, "Oh, look out, there's somebody behind you, you know, do watch it." And of course they couldn't hear what they were saying because they weren't in actual contact with them. But it was very intense. And we also heard all the language that they did, because you swear in battle. You know, buggers and bloodies and four-letter words and all sorts of things. I mean, which you're going to say when you're being attacked, aren't you? And somebody got very uptight about girls hearing all this language. Well, we weren't concerned with that. A, we didn't know what it meant. B, we didn't care about that. We only cared about our pilots.
A flotilla of destroyers steamed into view, patrolling the seas against possible invaders. Suddenly, a big flight of German dive bombers was reported. Patrolling RAF fighters hurtled to intercept them. In the battle which followed, 9 Nazis were shot down.
Really, I suppose it was one of the most exciting periods of my life to watch these dogfights. We could hear the screech of the German dive bombers in the Channel, the explosions. They was flying at rooftop level. You could see the pilots sitting in them, the markings on the planes. Hear the cannon shell blazing into one another.
Sometimes they got stuck. They couldn't get out, you know, because of either the lid jammed, the cockpit cover jammed, or there was fire. Now, the fire was the worst thing, because they got terribly burnt. And then that was when they used to scream, of course. The screaming was really, really terrible. And of course an awful lot of them went to hospital with these burns. Some of them pulled through and some didn't.
In July, the RAF loses 110 fighters. They shoot down 140 German planes. Hitler's attempt to dominate the Channel is being resisted, but only just. Whitelaw Reid travels to Dover to cover the story for his newspaper.
Well, it was Hitler weather most of the time that summer, you know, and the skies were bright blue, and you would see the planes high in the sky. I had been asked down for the weekend by Secretary of State for War Eden at the time, and I spent Saturday in their front yard with their children, shooting bows and arrows, and watching an occasional German fighter come streaking across the sky. So it was a nervous time, and as a result, a lot of people in Dover started living in the cliffs.
Many of the American reporters at Dover begin to feel a new affinity to the British people in this, their darkest hour. Witnessing the horrors of war leads Whitelaw Reid to conclude that American neutrality must end.
The next day, I was going out to Shakespeare Cliff to see some of the dogfights overhead, and all of a sudden there was a terrible screech. We went out to explore the beach, and one of the things I found on the beach was an old man who had been too close to a blast, and he'd been decapitated. His head was lying close by, and his dog lay by his side. It was a sad bit of evidence of the damage that was being done. It seemed that the world was on fire and that we ought to do something about it. That Hitler was an evil that had to be eliminated somehow. So progressively, I came to that kind of thinking myself.
Reports from Dover begin to turn American opinion. Pressure mounts to send substantial aid to Britain. But time is running out. Just across the Channel, the Germans are planning the biggest air attack in history. The young fighter pilots of the Royal Air Force will soon be tested as never before.
The battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit upland